August 1st, 1945. The office was dark, save for the green-shaded lamp on the desk. The weight in the air was not from the Washington humidity, but from a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. President Harry Truman sat alone. Before him, two pieces of paper defined the future of the world. On the left, a military estimate, numbers typed in neat columns. The invasion of Japan, codenamed Downfall. Expected American casualties, 1 million men. Expected Japanese losses, 10 million. Lives reduced to ink. He could see the beaches in his mind, not sand, but a churning red mud of flesh and steel. He had the photos from Iwo Jima, from Okinawa. He knew the cost. On the right, a brief, cryptic report from a desert in New Mexico. Diagnosis not yet complete, but results seem satisfactory. He knew what it meant. The test had worked. They called it the gadget, a son born on Earth. He had seen the photographs from the test site, a light that burned through closed eyelids, a cloud that boiled into the stratosphere, a fungal growth of unearthly power. It was not a weapon, it was a new god, and they were offering him the throne. The silence was a lie. It was full of sounds. The ghostly echo of typewriters from the map room downstairs. The distant, remembered cheer of soldiers he'd seen off from San Francisco. The rustle of a letter in his pocket from a mother in Iowa. "Please, Mr. President, bring my boy home." He was not a strategist in a high tower. He was a man from Missouri, a failed haberdasher, an accidental president. And now, the war had distilled itself into this moment, this room, this impossible arithmetic. His advisers had left. Their arguments hung in the air, conflicting spectres. General Marshall, stoic, pointing to the casualty projections. The scientists, divided. Some, like Oppenheimer, spoke of the blood on our hands with a poet's dread. Others, like Teller, saw only the brutal logic of ending the war. Secretary of War Stimson had circled Kyoto on a map, pleading for its removal from the target list. He called it a cultural treasure. Truman had agreed. It was a small act of mercy in an ocean of impending horror. But it changed nothing about the core choice. He pushed the papers aside and stood. The window showed a peaceful, sleeping capital, but his vision was elsewhere. He saw the choices not as options, but as living nightmares, each one unspooling in ghastly detail. The first nightmare, the invasion. He says no to the new weapon. He gives the green light to Operation Downfall. The greatest armada ever assembled steams toward Japan. His boys, from Kansas farms, from New York tenements, hit the beaches. The intelligence reports were clear. The Japanese had dug into the volcanic rock. They would fight for every inch, every cave. Civilians, given sharpened bamboo poles, would throw themselves at tanks. Kamikaze planes would fall from the sky like deadly rain. The war would stretch for another year, perhaps two. The telegrams of condolence would become a blizzard, burying the nation in grief. 1 million American families shattered. 10 million Japanese dead. A whole nation turned into a funeral pyre. It was the conventional path, the honourable path, and it led straight into hell. The second nightmare, the demonstration. Some of the scientists begged for this. Set it off in a remote bay, invite Japanese observers, show them the power, give them a final chance to surrender. It sounded humane, but in his mind the scenario twisted. The flash over Tokyo Bay, the stunned silence of the observers, then the radio silence from the Imperial War Council. The hardliners would call it a trick, a magnificent bluff. They would see hesitation as weakness. They would redouble their defences, rally the population for a fight to the death. And he would have wasted his only card. The element of shock gone. The bomb revealed. And while the diplomat talked, his men would keep dying, day after day, in the island campaigns that hadn't yet stopped. He would have traded a chance for a quick end for a protracted, even more bitter slaughter. The third nightmare. The atomic order. He picks up the pen. He signs. He authorizes the use of the weapon on a military target. A city. He tells himself it's a war plant, an army headquarters. But he's read the aerial surveys. The houses are woven around the factories. The workers live there. The children play there. He imagines a morning like any other. A mother cooking breakfast. A streetcar rattling down a lane. Then a light brighter than 1,000 suns. A heat that vaporizes stone and bone. A wind that shreds buildings into splinters. And then the silent, creeping death. The radiation. The poison in the rain. He would be the first leader in all of human history to unleash this. He would save 1 million of his own, but he would cross a line from which humanity could never step back. He would not just end a war. He would end an age of innocence. The world would be divided forever into before and after. And the face of this new, terrifying epoch would be his. He sat down heavily. The clock ticked. Each second was a life somewhere in the Pacific. There was no good choice. There was only a calculus of suffering. Mission. Men. Me. The old soldier's creed. The mission was to end the war, to prevent future wars. The men were the flesh and blood he sent to die, and he was the man in between, whose soul would be the price. He thought of the fanaticism he faced. The intercepted cables spoke of a nation preparing for a glorious death of 100 million. He wasn't fighting an army. He was fighting a cult of sacrifice. Reason had left the stage. Only overwhelming, undeniable terror could break the spell. His hand did not shake when he reached for the pen. That was the strange part. The moment of decision was not dramatic. It was quiet, hollow, and final. It felt less like an act of will and more like a surrender to a terrible, inevitable logic. He initialed the order. It was not a signature of triumph, but of acceptance. He had chosen the nightmare he could best justify to the ghosts he would have to live with. The machinery, once set in motion, had its own momentum. The orders went to Tinian Island. The bombers were prepared. He attended the Potsdam conference, issued the proclamation demanding surrender. The silence from Japan was his answer. When the news came of the Enola Gay's successful mission over Hiroshima, there was no celebration in his office. He released a statement to the press, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He spoke of a harnessing of the basic power of the universe, of destroying Japan's ability to make war. The words felt alien in his mouth. He had not harnessed anything. He had unleashed a demon. The second bomb on Nagasaki followed. The Japanese surrender came swiftly, abruptly. The war was over. The nation erupted in joy. Sailors kissed nurses in Times Square. He was hailed as the president who ended the greatest war in history. He smiled for the cameras. He accepted the accolades. But the weight did not lift. It changed shape. The consequences were not in the parades. They were in the quiet of his study at night. They were in the first, grainy photographs from Hiroshima that reached his desk. Shadows burned into stone, the skeletal ruins of a hospital. They were in the medical reports of a new, slow-killing disease called radiation sickness. They were in a letter from a scientist, quoting Hindu scripture. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Truman locked that letter in a drawer. He did not become death. He had simply been asked to give it a time and a place. The world moved on into a new, cold war. The mushroom cloud he had authored became the icon of the age, the backdrop to every fear. The weapon he used to end one war made all future wars unthinkable. He had traded the certain horror of invasion for the perpetual trembling terror of mutual annihilation. He had saved lives and damned the world to live under a permanent shadow. In his later years in independence, he would defend the decision to anyone who asked. He never apologized. He said he never lost a night's sleep over it. But those who knew him saw the toll. The way he would sometimes fall silent in the middle of a conversation, his gaze distant, fixed on some internal horizon only he could see. The burden was not in regret, but in knowledge. The intimate, terrible knowledge that the course of history had passed through his hands, and that his choice, made in a dark room from a menu of horrors, had forever altered the meaning of being human. His legacy was not just peace, but the price of that peace, etched forever into the conscience of the world. He had made the unthinkable real, and he had to live with what he had conjured every single day until the end.